You ever notice how the people who treat themselves like garbage somehow expect five-star treatment from everyone else? Yeah, that's not how this works. Welcome to the reality check nobody asked for, but everyone desperately needs. Look, I'm going to tell you something that's going to sting worse than accidentally using mouthwash right after drinking orange juice. If you don't respect yourself, the world will eat you alive and won't even have the courtesy to say grace first. The ancient Stoics figured this out 2,000 years ago while wearing togas and debating in marble courtyards, and somehow we're out here in 2026 with smartphones and therapy apps still getting this fundamental truth completely wrong. Here's the deal. This isn't some fluffy self-help nonsense where I tell you to manifest your dreams by thinking positive thoughts while sipping overpriced kombucha. This is about the raw, unfiltered philosophy that helped Marcus Aurelius run an empire, Epictetus survive slavery, and Seneca navigate the absolute circus that was Roman politics. These guys understood something crucial. Respect yourself or prepare to be treated like a doormat with a "Please step here" sign stapled to your face. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into 10 Stoic principles that'll transform you from someone who apologizes for existing into someone who commands respect just by walking into a room. And no, you don't need to grow a philosopher's beard or start wearing a toga, though honestly, togas are pretty comfortable. Principle 1. Your opinion of yourself sets the market price. Marcus Aurelius, literal emperor of Rome, once wrote in his personal journal that the opinion you hold of yourself is the single most important opinion in existence. Not your boss's opinion, not your ex's opinion, not even your mother's opinion, and trust me, she has many. Here's the thing. People treat you exactly how you teach them to treat you. It's like you're walking around with an invisible price tag on your forehead, and you're the one who writes the number. If you're constantly apologizing for things that aren't your fault, if you say yes when every fiber of your being is screaming no, if you're accepting treatment you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, congratulations, you just marked yourself down to clearance bin prices. The Stoics understood that self-respect isn't arrogance. It's not walking around thinking you're better than everyone else. It's simply refusing to accept less than what you deserve. Epictetus, who went from being a slave to one of the most respected philosophers in Rome, put it perfectly. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. The man literally wore chains and still had more self-respect than most people scrolling through Instagram comparing their lives to filtered fantasy. Think about it like this. You know how airlines treat first-class passengers versus economy? Same plane, completely different experience. The only difference? The price they paid. Well, guess what? In life, you set your ticket class. You decide whether you're getting the champagne and warm towels treatment or fighting for armrest space in the middle seat next to someone who thinks deodorant is optional. When you respect yourself, you establish boundaries. You stop over-explaining. You stop justifying your existence. You stop performing mental gymnastics trying to convince people of your worth. Because here's a secret the Stoics knew. People who truly know their value don't need to announce it every 5 seconds. Their actions, their standards, their unwavering self-respect, that announces it for them. But here's where it gets interesting, and trust me, you're going to want to hear this next part because it completely changes the game. Principle 2. Self-betrayal is the ultimate disrespect. Seneca once said something that should be tattooed on everyone's forehead. To be everywhere is to be nowhere. Translation? When you abandon yourself to please everyone else, you end up being nothing to no one, including yourself. Let's talk about self-betrayal for a second, because this is where most people completely torpedo their own self-respect without even realizing it. Every time you ignore your gut feeling to make someone else comfortable, you're basically telling yourself, hey, your feelings, your instincts, your boundaries, yeah, those don't matter. And you know what happens when you keep telling yourself you don't matter? Eventually, you start to believe it, and then everyone else believes it too. The Stoics were absolutely obsessed with integrity, and not the fake corporate seminar kind of integrity where you nod along to mission statements you don't believe in. I'm talking about real, bone-deep alignment between what you value and what you do. Marcus Aurelius didn't just philosophize about virtue while letting his empire fall apart. He lived it. Every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Here's what self-betrayal looks like in the wild. It's saying you'll go to that party you have zero interest in attending because you're afraid of disappointing someone. It's staying in a relationship that makes you feel small because you're terrified of being alone. It's taking on extra work you don't have time for because you can't stand the thought of being seen as not a team player. It's laughing at jokes that aren't funny. It's nodding along to opinions you completely disagree with. It's shrinking yourself into a bite-sized version that's easier for others to swallow. Every time you do this, you're not just being nice or flexible or agreeable, you're actively disrespecting yourself. You're teaching your brain that your needs are negotiable, that your boundaries are suggestions, that your values are more like guidelines, really. And your brain, it's taking notes, detailed notes. The Stoics believed that the only true wealth was virtue, and you can't practice virtue if you're constantly abandoning your principles for social acceptance. Epictetus would straight up tell his students, don't surrender what makes you who you are for temporary approval. The man had zero chill when it came to self-respect, and honestly, we need more of that energy. And speaking of energy, wait until you hear what the Stoics had to say about the company you keep, because this next principle is about to make you reconsider your entire contact list. Principle 3. You become what you tolerate. Okay, buckle up for this one because it's about to get uncomfortable. The Stoics had this wild idea that you literally become the average of what you surround yourself with. Not just people, everything. The content you consume, the environments you frequent, the behaviors you tolerate, the excuses you accept. All of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." But here's the thing he also understood. You can't be a good person while constantly surrounding yourself with people who bring out the worst in you. It's like trying to eat healthy while living in a donut factory. Sure, theoretically possible. Realistically, you're going to end up covered in sprinkles wondering where it all went wrong. The Stoics were ruthless about their associations, not because they were snobs, but because they understood a fundamental truth: proximity breeds influence. You hang around people who gossip, you'll start seeing the world through gossip-colored glasses. You tolerate friends who constantly disrespect you, you'll start thinking disrespect is normal. You accept mediocrity in your inner circle, congratulations, you just ordered the mediocrity value meal with a side of wasted potential. Here's the real kicker, though. Tolerating disrespect from others is just another form of disrespecting yourself. It's like you're holding the door open for people to walk all over you and then wondering why you feel like a human welcome mat. The Stoics would look at this and say, well, what did you expect? You literally invited this. Seneca had this brilliant way of putting it. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. Notice what he didn't say? He didn't say, keep toxic people around because you've known them since high school, or tolerate energy vampires because cutting them off seems mean. He said surround yourself with people who elevate you, and be someone who elevates others. It's a two-way street, not a one-way ticket to doormat city. Now, I can already hear some of you, but what about compassion? What about giving people chances? Here's the Stoic answer. Compassion doesn't mean being a punching bag. Understanding doesn't mean tolerating abuse. You can wish someone well while also wishing them well from a distance, preferably a very large distance, like different zip code distance. But here's where most people mess this up completely, and it ties directly into our next principle that's going to flip your understanding of control upside down. Principle 4. Control is an illusion, except when it comes to your response. All right, time for some Stoicism 101 that's going to sound simple, but will absolutely wreck your entire worldview in the best way possible. Ready? Here it is. You control almost nothing. Your job? Not really. Other people's opinions? Absolutely not. The weather, traffic, the economy, whether your favorite show gets renewed? Nope, nope, and nope. But here's what you do control: how you respond to all of it. Epictetus broke this down into the most straightforward philosophy ever. There are things within our control and things outside our control. Things within our control are thoughts, our actions, our reactions, our effort, our character. Things outside our control, literally everything else. And yet, somehow, we spend 99% of our energy stressing about that second category while completely neglecting the first. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, which sounds fancy but is actually just common sense wrapped in ancient Greek wisdom. When you waste energy trying to control things you can't control, you're not just being inefficient, you're actively disrespecting yourself by throwing your precious time and energy into a black hole that gives nothing back. Think about the last time someone disrespected you. Maybe they dismissed your idea in a meeting. Maybe they ghosted you. Maybe they made a snide comment about your life choices while simultaneously making questionable life choices themselves. Here's what you couldn't control: their action. Here's what you could control: whether you let that define your worth. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the most powerful empire on earth, had people constantly trying to manipulate him, betray him, and undermine him. You know what he wrote in his journal? "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The man ruled Rome, and he still understood he couldn't control everything. Meanwhile, we're out here losing our minds because someone didn't like our social media post. When you understand what you control versus what you don't, something magical happens. You stop begging for respect from people who were never going to give it. You stop exhausting yourself trying to change people's minds. You stop performing for an audience that isn't even paying attention. Instead, you focus all that energy on the one thing that actually matters: being someone you respect. Here's the brutal truth. You can't control if someone respects you, but you can control whether you respect yourself. And weirdly, when you nail that second part, the first part tends to take care of itself, because people can smell self-respect from a mile away, and it's either attractive or intimidating, but it's never ignorable. Now, speaking of things we can't control, let's talk about something that's going to make you seriously reconsider how you've been spending your most valuable resource.
Principle 5. Your time is non-refundable, so stop giving it away for free. Seneca wrote an entire essay called On the Shortness of Life, and spoiler alert, life isn't actually that short. We just waste most of it on things that don't matter. He said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." The man was calling people out in 65 AD for the same nonsense we're doing in 2026. Here's a fun exercise. Calculate how many hours you've spent this month doing things you genuinely didn't want to do for people who wouldn't do the same for you. Go ahead, I'll wait. Uncomfortable, right? That's because most of us are walking around like we have unlimited time credits, just handing them out to anyone who asks, no questions asked. The Stoics viewed time as the ultimate currency, not money, not status, time. Because you can always make more money, you can't make more time. Every second you spend is gone forever, vanished into the void, never to return. And yet we treat it like it's infinite, like we can just waste years in situations that drain us, and somehow there'll be a magical reset button. When you don't respect yourself, you treat your time like it's worthless. You say yes to every request. You attend every event. You have hour-long phone calls with people who only call when they need something. You sacrifice your goals, your rest, your peace for people who wouldn't sacrifice their lunch break for you. Marcus Aurelius had an empire to run, wars to manage, plagues to deal with, and he still found time every day to write, to think, to practice philosophy. You know why? Because he respected himself enough to protect his time. He understood that giving everyone access to every moment of his day wasn't generosity, it was self-destruction. Here's what respecting your time looks like. It's saying no without a detailed explanation. It's leaving events early when you're drained. It's not responding to messages immediately just because technology makes it possible. It's understanding that being available 24/7 doesn't make you dedicated, it makes you depleted. It's recognizing that your time with yourself, for yourself, is just as valuable as time with anyone else. The Stoics believed in living deliberately, with intention, with purpose. Epictetus told his students, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Not what everyone else wants you to do, what you have to do. That requires protecting your time like it's the precious, non-renewable resource it actually is. And if you think protecting your time is hard, wait until you hear about the next principle, because it's going to challenge everything you think you know about strength.
Principle 6. Vulnerability is not weakness, but tolerating disrespect is. Hold up, because this is where a lot of people get Stoicism completely backwards. They think being Stoic means being emotionless, cold, unfeeling, like you're supposed to transform into some kind of philosophical robot who doesn't have feelings. Wrong. So incredibly wrong. The Stoics weren't advocating for emotional suppression. They were advocating for emotional intelligence. There's a massive difference. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about his feelings, his struggles, his grief. Seneca wrote about missing his friends, about heartbreak, about fear. These weren't emotionless machines. They were deeply feeling humans who just refused to be controlled by their emotions. Here's the distinction that matters. Vulnerability, genuine, authentic vulnerability, is actually a form of strength. It takes courage to be honest about who you are, what you feel, what you need. That's not weakness. You know what is weakness? Tolerating disrespect because you're too afraid to set boundaries. The Stoics understood that true strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about knowing your worth even when things break. It's about being soft enough to feel everything and strong enough to not let those feelings destroy your self-respect. It's about being able to say this hurts without needing someone to fix it for you. When you respect yourself, you can be vulnerable without being a victim. You can share your struggles without making them your identity. You can ask for help without becoming helpless. You can feel deeply without drowning. That's the Stoic way. Feel everything, but don't let everything control you. But here's where people mess this up. They confuse being open with being available for mistreatment. They think vulnerability means accepting whatever behavior comes their way. Absolutely not. You can be vulnerable about your feelings while simultaneously having boundaries about your treatment. In fact, you should be. Epictetus said, "If someone speaks badly of you, consider whether what they say is true. If it is, correct yourself. If it isn't, laugh it off." Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say accept their disrespect, internalize their criticism, or let them define your worth. He said evaluate, correct if necessary, and move on. That's vulnerability with self-respect intact. Now here's where things get really interesting, because this next principle is going to expose the lie most people have been living their entire lives. Principle 7. Seeking validation is a rigged game you'll never win. Okay, real talk time. The Stoics figured out something that modern psychology is just now catching up to. External validation is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. You can keep pouring and pouring and pouring, but you'll never actually fill it. The problem isn't that you're not getting enough validation. The problem is that the bucket is fundamentally broken. Marcus Aurelius literally had an entire empire telling him how great he was. Statues, coins with his face on them, people bowing as he walked by. And you know what he wrote in his private journal? "I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others." Even with maximum validation, he understood it was hollow. Here's the trap. When you base your self-respect on other people's approval, you give them the remote control to your emotions. They can change your entire mood with a single comment. They can destroy your confidence with one weird look. They can make you question everything about yourself with their silence. And the worst part? They probably aren't even thinking about you. They're too busy worrying about what you think of them. The validation game is rigged because the rules keep changing. What impresses people today won't impress them tomorrow. What they praised you for last week, they'll criticize you for this week. You'll exhaust yourself trying to be everything to everyone and end up being nothing to yourself. Seneca put it perfectly. A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. Translation: stop torturing yourself trying to earn approval from people who are too busy seeking approval themselves to even notice your efforts. When you respect yourself, you become your own validator. You know your worth without needing constant confirmation. You can receive compliments without depending on them. You can handle criticism without being destroyed by it. You become internally regulated instead of externally controlled. Here's what that looks like practically. You post something online and it gets 0 likes, you don't spiral into an existential crisis. Someone doesn't invite you to something, you don't assume you're unlovable. Your boss doesn't praise your work, you don't question your entire career. Because your sense of self isn't held hostage by other people's reactions. The Stoics called this inner citadel, an unshakable fortress within yourself that external circumstances can't touch. Not because you don't care what anyone thinks, but because what you think about yourself is the foundation, and everything else is just weather passing by. But here's the principle that really separates people who talk about self-respect from people who actually embody it. And trust me, this one's going to sting a little.
Principle 8. Your standards for yourself should match your standards for others. Oh, this is where it gets spicy. You know that friend who constantly complains about how their partner doesn't appreciate them while they simultaneously treat themselves like absolute garbage? Yeah, we need to talk about that. Actually, we need to talk about how most of us are that friend. The Stoics were all about consistency, not the boring kind where you eat the same breakfast every day, but the profound kind where your values actually align with your actions. Epictetus said, "First, learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak." In other words, don't demand from others what you won't give yourself. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you wouldn't tolerate a friend speaking to you the way you speak to yourself in your head, you're a hypocrite. If you expect others to respect your time, but you waste your own time on meaningless nonsense, you're a hypocrite. If you want people to see your value, but you don't value yourself, you're, you guessed it, a hypocrite. Marcus Aurelius practiced something radical. He held himself to the same standards he held everyone else. Actually, scratch that. He held himself to higher standards than everyone else. Not because he was better, but because he understood that self-respect means practicing what you preach, especially when no one's watching. Think about the standards you have for how people should treat you. Now honestly ask yourself, do you treat yourself that way? Do you speak to yourself with kindness? Do you honor your own needs? Do you follow through on commitments to yourself the way you expect others to follow through on commitments to you? Most people have ironclad boundaries for how others should behave, while absolutely no boundaries for how they behave toward themselves. They'll demand respect from everyone else, while simultaneously accepting 0 respect from the person they spend 24/7 with, themselves. Seneca wrote, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness. That includes being kind to yourself. That includes respecting yourself. That includes treating yourself with the same dignity, patience, and grace you extend to others." Here's what this looks like in practice. If you wouldn't let a friend skip meals and run on coffee and anxiety, don't do it to yourself. If you wouldn't tell someone you care about that they're worthless and stupid, stop saying it to yourself. If you'd encourage a friend to leave a situation that's destroying them, take your own advice. And speaking of taking your own advice, this next principle is going to reveal the real reason most people struggle with self-respect, and it's not what you think.
Principle 9. Self-respect requires self-knowledge, and most people are strangers to themselves. All right, here's where we get philosophical in a way that might make your brain hurt, but stick with me because this is crucial. The Stoics were obsessed with self-knowledge. Not in a narcissistic, let me tell you about my personality type way, but in a deep, sometimes uncomfortable, who am I actually beneath all the masks way. Socrates said, know thyself. The Stoics ran with that and said, no, seriously, actually know yourself. Not the person you pretend to be on social media, not the person you wish you were, the person you actually are right now, flaws and all. Marcus Aurelius spent hours in self-reflection, not to beat himself up, but to understand himself. He wrote, "Dig within. Within is the wellspring of good, and it is always ready to bubble up if you just dig." But here's the thing. Most people never dig. They spend their entire lives performing a version of themselves they think others will approve of, while having absolutely no idea who they actually are. You can't respect someone you don't know. Think about it. If you had a coworker you'd never spoken to, never spent time with, never learned anything about, could you genuinely respect them? No. You might be polite, but there's no real respect there. Well, guess what? Most people are that coworker to themselves. They don't know what they actually value versus what they think they should value. They don't know what they genuinely enjoy versus what they do for appearances. They don't know their real limits, their authentic desires, their true strengths and weaknesses. They're walking around with "Hello, my name is" tags filled out by society, family, peer pressure, and social media algorithms. Epictetus taught that the foundation of philosophy, and by extension the foundation of a good life, is self-awareness. He'd ask his students questions like, what do you actually want? Not what does your culture want for you, not what would impress people, what do you want? And most people couldn't answer because they'd never actually asked themselves. When you don't know yourself, you can't respect yourself because you're essentially trying to respect a fictional character. You're respecting the role you play, not the person you are. And that's exhausting. It's like being an actor who never gets to leave the set, never gets to take off the costume, never gets to just exist as themselves. Here's what self-knowledge requires: brutal honesty, regular check-ins with yourself, asking hard questions, admitting uncomfortable truths, recognizing patterns you'd rather ignore, acknowledging the gap between who you are and who you present yourself to be. It's not comfortable. The Stoics never promised comfort. They promised truth. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." You know why? Because when you don't know yourself, you're constantly imagining threats to a self that doesn't even really exist. You're defending an image, you're protecting a performance, you're respecting a phantom. And this brings us to our final principle, the one that ties everything together and will completely transform how you move through the world.
Principle 10. Self-respect is a practice, not a destination, and the practice starts right now. Here's the grand finale, the principle that separates the people who nod along to philosophy from the people who actually embody it. Self-respect isn't something you achieve once and then coast on forever. It's a daily practice, sometimes an hourly practice, sometimes a minute-by-minute practice. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations once and call it done. He wrote them daily, reminding himself of the same principles over and over because he understood something crucial. You don't master self-respect, you practice it every single day for the rest of your life. The Stoics viewed philosophy not as an academic exercise, but as a spiritual practice. It was their gym for the soul, their training ground for life. Epictetus ran what was essentially an ancient boot camp for self-respect, and his students had to practice these principles daily, not just understand them intellectually. Here's what most people get wrong. They think one day they'll suddenly arrive at self-respect. They think once they achieve this goal, land that job, find that relationship, lose that weight, then they'll respect themselves. That's backwards. That's completely, utterly backwards. Self-respect isn't the reward for achievement, it's the foundation that makes achievement possible. You don't earn self-respect by doing impressive things. You do impressive things because you already respect yourself enough to believe you're worthy of the effort. Think of it like this. Self-respect is like brushing your teeth. You don't brush your teeth once and have perfect dental health forever. You do it every day, sometimes twice a day. Even when you don't feel like it, even when you're tired, even when you've had a terrible day.
because you understand that consistent practice prevents disaster. Every time you set a boundary, that's practice. Every time you honor a commitment to yourself, that's practice. Every time you speak to yourself with kindness instead of cruelty, that's practice. Every time you walk away from something that diminishes you, that's practice. Every time you choose what's right over what's comfortable, that's practice. And here's the beautiful part. You don't have to be perfect at it. The Stoics never demanded perfection. Marcus Aurelius admitted his mistakes constantly. Seneca wrote about his failures. Epictetus acknowledged his struggles. They weren't superhuman. They were just committed to the practice. Seneca said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Your practice of self-respect doesn't start tomorrow. It doesn't start Monday. It doesn't start when conditions are perfect. It starts right now, this moment, this breath. The next time someone disrespects you, that's your practice opportunity. The next time you're tempted to abandon your boundaries, that's your practice opportunity. The next time you start the negative self-talk, that's your practice opportunity. Every moment is a chance to choose self-respect. And here's what happens when you commit to the practice. Slowly, gradually, consistently, the world starts treating you differently. Not because the world changed, because you changed. You raised your standards. You enforced your boundaries. You stopped accepting the unacceptable. You started showing up for yourself the way you'd been showing up for everyone else. People notice. Not everyone will like it. Some people benefited from your lack of self-respect, and they'll be upset when you take that away. That's okay. That's actually confirmation you're doing it right. The Stoics knew that living according to virtue often meant being unpopular. Marcus Aurelius made decisions that upset people daily. He did it anyway.
So here's where we are. You've got 10 Stoic principles that have survived literally thousands of years because they're true. Not trendy, not Instagram quote of the day true. Actually, fundamentally, deeply true. Respect yourself first, or be treated like nothing. It's not a threat. It's not motivational poster nonsense. It's just how the world works. It's how humans work. It's how you work. The ancient Stoics figured this out while dealing with slavery, empire collapse, plagues, wars, and political chaos that makes our modern problems look like a minor inconvenience. And their solution? Start with yourself. Respect yourself. Know yourself. Control what you can control. Protect your time. Practice virtue. Set standards. Maintain boundaries. Do the work. You don't need to wait for permission to respect yourself. You don't need to earn it through achievements. You don't need validation from others. You just need to make the decision right now that you're done accepting less than you deserve. And look, I know this isn't easy. If it were easy, everyone would do it. The Stoics never promised easy. They promised worthwhile. They promised meaningful. They promised a life lived with dignity, purpose, and self-respect. So here's your call to action, and it's beautifully simple. Start the practice today, not tomorrow, today. Choose one principle from this video and implement it before the day ends. Set one boundary. Honor one commitment to yourself. Speak to yourself with kindness once. Walk away from one situation that diminishes you. Just one thing. Because that's how practice works. That's how transformation works. That's how you go from someone who tolerates disrespect to someone who commands respect just by existing. The Stoics are gone, but their wisdom remains. Use it, practice it, embody it. Respect yourself first. Everything else follows. Now go do the work.